Hi, everyone, and welcome to our town hall. This week, we are honored to be joined by former Lieutenant Governor of Wisconsin, Rebecca Kleefisch. We are super excited to have her, and we are excited that all of you can join us on our streaming platforms. So just a quick plug before we get started. If you don't already follow us on social media, go ahead and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at GenZGOP.org. And if you're looking for us on Facebook, it's just Gen Z GOP. So with that, welcome to our fourth installment of our Town Hall series. My name is Elle Kolish. I serve as Vice President of Communications for Gen Z GOP, and I am here joined with my colleague, Carter Morgan.
Hello, nice to meet you. Well, I guess nice of you to meet me. My name is Carter Morgan. I'm the Vice President of Technology for Gen Z GOP, and I really can't express how excited we are tonight to have Rebecca Kleefisch join us. It really is an honor to meet with the former Lieutenant Governor, and we're so excited for you to get to meet her too and to ask her some of your questions.
So just some brief background. My name is Elle. As I said, I reside in Antioch, Illinois, which is a tiny blip on the map right on the border of Illinois and Wisconsin. Spent much of my life in Fremont, Wisconsin, so I'm super excited to be joined by this awesome special guest today. And without ado, we are going to bring her on. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, everybody.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to give Rebecca the stage to kind of introduce herself, and then we'll jump into our questions.
Thank you, Al. Thank you, Carter. They're right. My name is Rebecca Kleefisch, and I am the former Lieutenant Governor of the great state of Wisconsin, and currently the president of a not-for-profit called the 1848 Project. It's called the 1848 Project because if you were ever in fourth grade in the state of Wisconsin, you know that Wisconsin became a state in 1848. We think that our pioneer principles are still good for something in our state. And frankly, I think in the GOP, we believe that still. However, I think that they are under siege a little bit. And it's time for us to get back to our shared values and shared principles that built our state and built our country strong and great. And that's why I was so excited when I spotted you guys on Twitter one day. I was scrolling through, and I have two Gen Z daughters, and one of them is about to be well, I suppose she's a freshman in college right now, but she'll be entering university and actually going onto a campus and have the whole freshman experience in the fall. And I pointed out your account and I said, this is something that you could actually get behind. Because let's be honest, we have a lot of events, Lincoln Day dinners, Reagan Day dinners, now Trump Day dinners, and they're not exactly populated by people who can say the lyrics to Cardi B songs, right? It's not with people who, no offense, Al, can string a whole bunch of photos behind them or have LED lights in their bedrooms, right? So you guys get it, but my kids get it too. They're looking for peers. They're looking for friends because, frankly, your generation is under attack by the left. There are far liberal fanatics in this progressive and, frankly, let's call it what it is, downright socialist movement in this country. There are some people in this country who would like to see us, no kidding, delve into the world of communism. This is what we're up against. This is what my kids, what your generation and next generations of this country are up against. And they'll do everything to stop us from loving individual freedoms and rights guaranteed to us in our Constitution, from looking at our shared values and saying, hey, we actually do want to be one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We want to live Martin Luther King's values the same way we live our shared values today of judging people by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin, what they look like. These are the things that I think we can all get behind, and why I was so excited when I spotted your account, shared it with my kids, and hope that tonight can just be the beginning of a really cool relationship. Because frankly, I think there are a lot of Republicans who are missing the boat when it comes to talking with and engaging Gen Z and our millennial voters, and needs to stop. We need to have a really robust conversation about how we walk forward together. So thanks, guys, so much for having me here tonight.
Well, thank you for joining us. It was super exciting. I remember texting in our group chat being like, guys, look, who just followed us on Twitter. So it's super exciting to have you here for an
So you knew
event.
the exact day. That's
I did.
impressive,
I did.
Al.
I'm sure I could go back and find the screenshots, but I was geeking out. As the resident like Suedo, Wisconsinite, I was super, super excited. And I was actually able to attend YAF in Miami and ask you a question, and that was super fun.
Oh, see, the governor. So you know that YAF, which is the Young America's Foundation, is now run by Wisconsin's former governor and my partner in the executive branch of the state, former Governor Scott Walker. And he is so tremendously proud to lead that movement because he's looking to plant not only a chapter on every college campus, but every high school campus in America. So our young conservatives do have a community wherever they are. And he asked me to come down to Miami and speak to the convention on cancel culture, which is something I don't tend to talk about very much. But he said, you know what, Becky, this is perfect. This is going to be the 10-year anniversary of our recall election. So for those of you who don't know, Governor Walker and I became the first ever governor and lieutenant governor in the entire country to face recall elections and survive. I was the first lieutenant governor in the nation to even face a recall election. And there was nothing criminal or nothing scurrilous that we just simply did jobs. We looked far ahead into the future, saw a problem we were headed for, and we fixed it. And the good news is now we've saved $15 billion because of the fix, but there were a lot of people who were really irritated. And we like to say that before Antifa and before all of the protesters in the masks, we had them here in Wisconsin, and they camped out at our Capitol, brought their crock pots of food, their changes of underwear, and they washed up in the bathrooms in the Capitol, and they slept in sleeping bags in our rotunda. They banged on their drums and they rattled the cages of anyone who came in with their vuvuzelas. But we had some serious protests. We went through some serious stuff in order to accomplish what we accomplished, but we're darn proud of that. And he said, come speak on cancel culture because in that moment, they literally tried to cancel you, cancel everything we had done, every effort we had made to put Wisconsin back on top, but they didn't succeed. And so I think cancel culture is becoming an epidemic in Gen Z, particularly because you guys are digital natives. And so I was really glad to go to that conference. That was a lot of fun.
No, it was totally a great time. So before you were able to be, attempted to be recalled or even attempted to be canceled, you had quite the extensive career, not only in politics, but also in media, which is super interesting to hear, especially on a Gen Z side. As you just said, we are digital natives. We grew up with our lives on social media. We tend to post everything from what we eat in the morning to what we're doing over the weekends. And that is just a natural part of our lives, which is very, very unique to our generation. So I was wondering, at what age did you get involved in politics, and what steps in your career prepared you to kind of take state leadership and now serve as a beacon for conservatives?
Well, I was told once upon a time that I was a digital immigrant, and I was so offended, I didn't even know what to do with it. I told the guy that I learned how to code by typing the code to make a picture of a cat on DOS when the computers were like this size. You can't even fit it in my little picture here. This size, and they were all black, and the cat was green. Like there weren't even colors on the screen. And the guy is kind of laughing at me, thinking, oh, this poor lady, it's okay, sweetie. But here's the thing. I know today that I am a digital immigrant, and I know that this is what you guys lived. But when it comes to understanding media and marketing, I do know a thing or two because I actually graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison
Go
in their
Badgers!
J school. Yeah, actually, the water that I went and got is a Bucky Badger water. So I guess shout out to my alma mater, the University of Wisconsin. I do believe to this day I may be the only conservative that they have ever graduated from the University of Wisconsin Journalism School. So I am a disappointment to this day. However, it was really, really helpful when I entered politics. So I spent a career in television news, and then when I had my kids, I leaned out. I know that there's this book telling all women to lean in at all times. I leaned in and then I leaned out and then I leaned back in again. So maybe there should be a book telling women to just kind of be flexible, because when I leaned out, started my own small business in media and marketing. I took contract work, and a lot of it, particularly during the advent of the Great Recession. And that's when I was approached to run for lieutenant governor. And I know that you guys will probably ask at some point about being a woman in politics, because people just tend to, particularly because I'm a woman inside a conservative movement, and there are fewer of us than there are on the other side of the political aisle. But here's the thing. Rutgers University does this study called Poised to Run. And it remarks that quite often men, Carter, I'm looking at you, and everybody else who's a dude out there, quite often men will look in the mirror and see a political leader, a candidate, a public servant looking back at them, and they don't need anybody to convince them of that. There's no imposter syndrome. They just walk in and believe they can accomplish what they set out to accomplish. But this study will also say that women quite often need to be asked to run for political office. In my case, I was the wife of a state representative, a woman who had a small media marketing company, and a stay-at-home mom. And I was just longing for any sort of adult conversation at this point in my life. And when somebody started talking to me about politics, some of the things that I used to cover as a journalist, I was just delighted that nobody wanted Cheerios and chicken McNuggets. And so I engaged. And the conversation led down a really weird rabbit hole. This guy wound up saying, Becky, you ought to consider running for lieutenant governor. And I did what any good stay-at-home mom would do. I laughed wildly and uncomfortably, because what are you supposed to do with something like that? But he wound up being right. A few months later, made the decision that, based on my name ID from television and my expertise in media and marketing and my ability to put a sentence together and my knowledge of politics and my background in covering state policy, this was something that I could do. And there was an area where I could actually help our state in a more robust way than just being at home and raising the next generation of awesome Wisconsinites. I figure, you know what? I can do both. And so I followed the natural trajectory of every stay-at-home mom. I ran for statewide office.
That's incredible.
Well, no, that really is incredible. And I think I have young kids myself. And, even though I've been working right now, I can relate so strongly to that feeling of wanting to have a conversation about anything that's not chicken nuggets or Cheerios. So
sorry, man. But listen, here's the thing. That's your season of life right now. Seasons are going to change, and it'll be gone before you know it. And then your kids will be popping on to your Zoom calls saying hi to people in their own generation, and then walking out the door because they can drive. So weird things happen. Those little itty bitty kids now are going to get big.
Well, let's talk a bit about sort of the next generation. And I'm interested in your project 1848 and sort of what lessons you think that can share with our generation. I'm a descendant of pioneers myself, out west, proud Mormon pioneers. And so that's something that's near and dear to my heart. Why don't you talk a bit about what our pioneer ancestry has to offer the current generation?
Sure. I think there is a certain ruggedness that we can look to that pioneer strength and glean from those people who were willing to hew out of wilderness and some of the toughest conditions under the sun a great economy and a constitution that has allowed us to be a free people in this great experiment we call America. And so I think if we tap into those shared values, we'll be able to produce a really extraordinary policy agenda for Wisconsin, and hopefully Wisconsin will be a beacon for the country. So the 1848 project seeks to do that by having listening sessions all across the state of Wisconsin. And we do some listening sessions by demographics. So for example, I'll have a listening session with millennial entrepreneurs or angry moms. Today, I had a listening session based on an economic sector. So it was alternative energy policy. And I've had them on other sections of policy as well, agriculture policy or Second Amendment or conservation policy for those sportsmen who appreciate Wisconsin's sporting heritage. We also have them, based on region. So Wisconsin is a fairly large state. We're 8 hours door to door, and different regions of our state have very different issues. But we're listening to all types of people. And we're not limiting it just to conservatives. There was a very liberal mayor, openly very liberal mayor, who came to one of my listening sessions in a city called Wausau because she was invited. And she knew that the goal of the 1848 Project was to listen to everyone. Because we honestly believe at the 1848 Project that listening is going to get us where we need to go. Because policy, good policy, is dictated to the government by the people, not to the people by the government. We're called public servants for a reason. And I don't want to Jesus all over you tonight, but here's the thing. We're called to serve if we are in elected office. That means sometimes we got to get our hands dirty. We've got to listen hard because there are a lot of Wisconsinites, there are a lot of Americans who feel very unheard right now, very unlistened to. And it's important for us to be humble enough to hear them out.
Yeah, so I guess that kind of brings us to my next question, and something that's really near and dear to my heart. As I shared earlier, I'm from a more rural area in the Midwest. Fremont, Wisconsin, I think has a population of about 662. Kind of aware of how we can get kind of put off in corners. And so something that I like to talk about a lot is when you don't leave the same 50 miles all of your life, how are you supposed to engage and or care about what happens outside of it? And then how are you supposed to think that other people care about what happens within your 50 miles? So what we've seen is that over the past few years, there's been this broadening divide between middle America and the Midwest and the rest of the country. So what do you think is most important and necessary for kind of reconnecting and bringing opportunity back to this region?
This is probably the one good thing that came out of the pandemic. There's really a boatload of bad. And the one good thing is that people found useful places for technology in their lives. And listen, I know that, Pew just put out some research that says that Gen Z uses YouTube more than anything as a social app. Believe that or not, 85%. Second, I think, is Insta. And then after that is Snapchat. And so this is actually not a bad thing and is a way to connect. But we are careful about how we are connecting, because in the GOP, we are the party of facts. We are the party of science. We are not the party that reposts people's stories just because they have flower crowns around them and something sweet inside that is completely unsourced and frankly untrue. Because when we argue, it's very important that we argue with facts and that they are sourced. So if we want to connect, it's cool to connect over all of those social apps, because frankly, that's where Gen Z is. That's where a lot of the millennial population is. But it's also important that we connect over shared values and we use facts in order to tell our stories. But then I'll add to that, you got to tell stories. So whether you put the flower crown around it or not, or whether you've got a great picture and animation or not, we've got to tell stories and illustrate to people why our policy beliefs are the right ones to guide America forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess my next question is kind of a follow-up on that. We just talked about how we can get connected and our phones are super helpful and how that is unlocking a lot, especially within the pandemic. And so I guess my question there is, how can we better engage the Midwest? How can we better engage the everyday American into our national political environment that right now is currently being led and championed by coastal elite ideology?
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing that a lot.
You're 100% right. We need Midwestern values and middle American values to take center stage. I have said this a million times in my life. I swear I would never need to fundraise for anyone ever again if I only had a dime for every single time I said, I wish the Koch brothers would have, instead of spending bazillions of dollars on campaigns, had bought up movie studios and television studios so that way back then, they were the ones formulating and then dictating American pop culture, because it would be our vision for America, individual freedoms and liberties and opportunities, and doing things that make sense for both the environment and for family sustaining wage jobs, because shockingly, you can do both at the same time. Happy Earth Day, everyone.
Happy Earth
It's
Day.
it's really important too that we engage as states. And you made a really important distinction. You said a lot of it is dictated by the coasts on national policy. Our Constitution has a 10th Amendment that says states' rights. And I will tell you that so much can still be accomplished at state governments that comes to practical fisticuffs, comes to the floor of the United States Congress and the executive branch, the presidency and the White House. And so sometimes it is better to do your activism and your heavy lifting on the state level. And after having April elections here, I would argue the local level too. Democrats have been doing this for years. They are brilliant at recruiting candidates to run for nonpartisan local office. And Gen Zers on this Zoom right now, let me tell you, you do not need to be 35 years old like I was when I ran for lieutenant governor in order to run for these offices. You just got out of high school, run for school board. There is no one better who understands the flaws of your local high school than you do. And P.S., you're in the middle of pursuing a degree, which makes you qualified. Don't let anyone tell you you are not. Because I told you I was on Pew today, finding out exact stats and data. I wrote this down. Did you know that Gen Z is far more likely to be in college 2 or 4 years than previous generations? Right now, of those Gen Zers who are out of high school, guys, it's 57%. You are qualified to run for office. Consider it. Don't wait for somebody else to ask you to do it. I'm asking you right now on this Zoom call, consider running for office, because the farm team of the GOP is in these nonpartisan offices: school board, county board, mayors, town presidents. These are important offices. And frankly, they touch lives in a much more intimate way than some of your federal officials can ever expect to affect lives.
Well, then why don't you talk to us a bit about that, Lieutenant Governor? What advice would you? I mean, that's a daunting task for someone, just out of high school. But I agree with you. So, what advice would you give for someone looking to take that on, who might be a little scared?
No, it's not. No, it's not. And here's why. You have an advantage over someone like me because you understand this. You are a digital native, remember. So you already understand how to coalition build in a very unique way. You understand and start off with a built-in campaign team. They're your friends and your followers. They are all the people on your staff. They are all of the people who have, I don't know if any of you have a Facebook page. It's like the old folks home of social media. So I'm there. But here's the thing. You already have a built-in campaign team, people who will spread your message. If that's the case, and you already have beliefs that you have spent every single day until this moment determining you deeply hold, then you're ready to go, with the exception of basically figuring out, what your strategy is going to be and what the colors of your literature are going to be. And if that's the case, if you have built-in friends and followers, and I'll bet you do, and if you already have deeply held beliefs, then you're ready. I would suggest to you maybe go to a campaign school. American Majority puts them on all the time. Your local county Republican Party probably also puts them on. Google your state Republican Party because they probably have county campaign schools. They're going to tell you everything from how to do basic fundraising to how to knock on doors to how big your literature should be to how many hands you got to shake in order to make it to a W on election night. But it's is not nearly as difficult as you might think on this local level, because I'm going to tell you right now, he who does the most doors wins. Mm-hmm. That basically means that if you knock on the most doors and you ask the most people for their vote, you hand them a piece of literature that you made that says, "Hi, I'm Rebecca. Here's a little bit about me. And if you have any questions, there's my number. I'd love to have your vote on election day." And then you don't bother them anymore. You don't sit there and ask them if they have questions, make them feel uncomfortable. You allow them to guide the process after that. If you do that the most times, you win.
Absolutely. So I guess my next question kind of comes to how you ran your race for lieutenant governor. This is something that I remember, and it's like I think is really, really important, and I'm hoping we can kind of bring back to politics. But when you were running, you said that you were running on kitchen table common sense. Can you give us some more insights into like what that means to you and how that kind of you use that throughout your governance, and then how you use that in your campaign and what you're kind of trying to bring back to the GOP?
Sure. I know that that sounds awfully normal person and, kind of basic, but I think people want some relatable content in a campaign. They want normal people. They want people who are actually like them, who understand what they're going through. They don't want the person who hasn't cleaned a toilet in 10 years. They don't want the person who hasn't occasionally throughout their lives, lamented the cost of healthcare, or we're a little bit concerned about how they make all the payments all at once, or, did the volunteer work because they had to make it work to build their resume. People want normal people, but normal people who are willing to lead, normal people who have strong constitutions, who are willing to take the slings and arrows, because frankly, they're too busy to do it themselves. They're too busy raising their kids. They're too busy volunteering at the local brownie troop or Boy Scout troop. They're too busy, hustling back and forth to their brand new job or their college classes. They're too busy to do it. So they need a proxy for all of their beliefs. And they want someone who's reasonable, who has been through. So that's what kitchen common sense was about. I basically went through and talked about in one of my videos how our current governor at that time was spending his per capita increase in the budget. And I brought a load of groceries and I plopped them on my counter and I said, for that very same per capita increase, my share of the increase in the state budget, I could buy. And I started pulling out tons and tons and tons of things that my family could buy if we didn't do what this guy was suggesting we instead did with my money. And I think that's what is missing a lot of times. People understanding that this money is actually ours. The government takes it and we don't have much of a choice. We are forced into buying their services, and we're also forced to be their customer. We don't get a choice in it, but what we do get a choice in is who's our proxy, who gets to decide how we spend that money. And in that case, I wanted to spend the money on a 6-pack of beer and some brats, and not on a gas tax increase and on a handful of other bads that he had built in to his budget. Now, thankfully, that wasn't the budget that we wound up having because Scott Walker and I were elected. But I think it's still really important that we have relevant and relatable people who are willing to take the risk and run.
So I'm hoping go ahead, Carter. My bad.
So talking about that next generation, right? That's got to pick up the reins and run for office. What changes would you hope to see in the Republican Party as the next generation sort of comes to power?
Well, I think it's important that we engage people better where they are on the topics they want to talk about. I told you I had a very small media marketing company in between my time as a journalist and my time as Wisconsin's lieutenant governor. And when you market to people as consumers, you would never have a brand ambassador for a certain product who is completely irrelevant and would never use that product, right? In the same way, we need to make sure that we're running and recruiting candidates who are relevant brand ambassadors for what we are propping them up to do. And we also need to be talking and engaging on the platforms where people are. If we're not putting good content that's shareable on platforms like YouTube and like Instagram, talking about the things you actually would talk about in a normal conversation, just, the things that I'm hearing, then we're missing the boat. We're missing constant opportunities to engage with you. Today is Earth Day, and that's a big deal in Wisconsin, which has been, the home of conservation and the birthplace of conservation as long as I could possibly remember. And so I posted something on Instagram today and Twitter about Earth Day and about how important it is that future generations have the same experience that my kids have had with nature. And that means clean beaches and clean water and oceans and clean air that we breathe. But also, we need to hold other countries to that same standard. So we're talking about something that Gen Z does and wants to talk about, which is having a healthy environment. I don't think there's a single Republican who doesn't want that. But I think there are a lot of Republicans who just take it for granted that, well, everyone assumes that we assume that. I don't think everybody assumes that we assume that. I think there are a lot of people who genuinely question Republican beliefs on the environment. And so I think it's important that we articulate them. So I did. But we need to constantly do that. We've got to not forget that we need to constantly put these things in front of the people who are talking about them and on the places where they're talking.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess that kind of transitions in. We were talking about how you have daughters who are in Gen Z. And so if you do, I'm not sure what your kitchen table conversations look like. But when you talk to them about politics and when they're kind of looking to make their own political beliefs on their own, what do you think is the biggest deterrent right now for Gen Z and even your daughters and being kind of full in the Republican Party? And how can we help combat that in the future?
Tone is so important to my kids. And I think you guys probably could speak to that as well. I mean, I follow your Twitter and I see that tone is very important to you guys, and I get it. That has changed over time. I think years ago, Republicans got away with putting out a whole bunch of facts and charts and just assuming that people would say, well, this is a government, it's a fact-based decision. We make our decisions based on data. But yet, not 20 minutes ago, I just said, we got to tell our stories. We've got to tell stories about things because that's much more relevant to people today. That's how people communicate. People communicate literally with stories on their Twitter, on their Instagram, on their Facebook, on their Snapchat. We need to tell stories. And that's very, very important to my kids, that the tone of that story match the tone of mom at home, as well as mom on the stump or mom, in a boardroom meeting. And I think sometimes Republicans miss that. We need to be very human in how we tell our stories and also other people's stories. And that means a pretty extreme level of humility, right back to what I was talking about being a servant. We've got to listen, we've got to serve, because only those people are the ones who should get those jobs. Because if you're not willing to listen and if you're not willing to put others' needs above your own, this is probably not a perfect fit for you, because public service is not a place where you get rich. It's a place where you serve. And that's a very important distinction. And I think my kids really care about that. I would also say, because I'm raising two Gen Z women, that the one thing I hope changes is I do hope we see more women in leadership as opposed to being just the workers as a default. My kids don't really know any different, but it is, well, I mean, this is how they've grown up. I mean, my husband ran for state assembly when my big girl was still in a stroller, and I painted the Daddy for Assembly sign that we stuck to the stroller because, remember, I was the marketing guru, and that ran through all the parades, right? And so It's really important, I think, that they see women striving, and that's how they've lived their lives, because that's what they see on a daily basis, but not everybody does. And I will tell you to this day that the vast majority of volunteers and workers over my time in GOP politics in Wisconsin have been women. And you know what? That's awesome. I love it. However, I don't want that to be a deterrent from some woman, when I ask, will you please run for political office? Them saying, okay, because that's very, very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think in my own personal experience too, especially with in the Republican Party, as you were saying, that presence of women in leadership is really rare. And then when we do see them kind of get to these like national levels, we see them be treated a little bit differently. I think you can see this as well with Ivanka Trump, even in the sense of she did a lot of work that was tailored toward making sure that we could make childcare more affordable, and try and get that on a national platform. And even then, she was torn down for basic things that women are. And I know that you just gave some advice, but if you want to just kind of sum up what your biggest piece of advice specifically for women and young women are, mainly too, because that social media aspect, we're growing up on social media and there's a lot of things that can be brought back into our faces, and women are going to be plagued with that. So what is your biggest piece of advice there?
Well, I mean, to quote the great philosopher Taylor Swift, haters gonna hate, and it's up to us to shake it off. But you do have to have very thick skin to do this line of work. I will be very frank. My children, your families need to have thick skin. Some people choose not to read their troll comments. I think mine are funny sometimes, so I do. Like, we'll read them at the dinner table.
My
Some of them
strategy
are
too.
so funny. But I'm not to the point where, I heart them, because I don't want to entertain more and more and more of them. But, you got to take some things with a grain of salt and a sense of humor. I will say that. But my job as a news anchor really uniquely prepared me for that, because I used to get stupid emails about how I did my hair, or the terrible color combination that I chose to wear, or, the cadence of the words that I said, or how I mispronounced something, or I stumbled too much. It was all dumb, really surfacey stuff. Now, if someone criticizes me, it's over a really deeply held belief, and I'm happy to throw down, because I've spent my entire life getting to that place. And if they want to criticize me over policy views, sure, happily, I'll engage on that. If you want to tell me that my hair looks like a helmet, okay, I've heard it. It looks like a wig. Yeah, okay, good job. It could be worse. I could have had to wear a real wig when I lost half my hair from cancer in the middle of my primary. There are a lot of people who will say a lot of stupid stuff, and that's where it's very important to have those communities. So Gen Z GOP, or YAF, or CRs, or your church community, or your synagogue, those things are very, very important to build up your sense of community. Even if your community is an online community, that's cool too. But you got to find some place where you get restored, because otherwise it can get kind of exhausting and kind of lonely, and you begin to feel kind of canceled. But here's the best advice I was ever given. Both as a woman and as a professional, but I would say honestly as a human being. So Carter, this one's for you too. You can have it all. You just can't have it all at once. So Carter, when I said that you're in a season of life where your kids kind of tie you to McNuggets and Cheerios, that won't be forever. And so every season will bring you new opportunities. Don't expect that you can have everything you want in the season you're in. And when I say that I wish there was a book that didn't just talk about leaning in or just talk about leaning out, a book that just taught you how to do calisthenics with your professional life, that's very real. Because if you look at women with political careers, it may look like they have it all. It may look like they've got it all together at home, and their kids are awesome, and they're the only woman in this boardroom, and they're giving this swell speech, and they're making all these diplomatic or economic development missions. Yeah, that's what it looks like. But don't forget that social media is everybody's on stage, And home is everybody's backstage. No one puts that stuff out there. So nobody knows about the tsunami of laundry that I have not done, or nobody knows how dirty my kids' rooms are, or that I haven't mowed in 3 weeks, that the neighbor posted a note on my front door that says, please mow, or we're calling the homeowners association. I mean, this stuff is real. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but when I said, normal people should run for office, that is normal. It's totally normal. But you also have to understand that you can't do a diplomatic trip for 10 days and at the same time have a perfectly kept house. You just can't do it. What you see on TV and in the movies and on social media, that is not real. That is not backstage stuff.
Well, no, thank you so much for that, Lieutenant Governor. As someone who just spent the other night 2 hours folding my own tsunami of laundry, it feels good to be heard and know that the laundry caucus is represented.
I love that about you. Way to fold. That's
real
good.
and honest work over here.
And I just wanted to touch on something you said, Lieutenant Governor, about how you're very willing to engage and throw down on policy issues. I think we here at Gen Z GOP, and I would hope every American would agree that a perfect America isn't one where we don't argue. Of course, we'll argue about deeply held beliefs, but it's one where we argue in good faith about those deeply held policy beliefs and not tear each other down personally or insult one another. So it's good to have leadership that believes in that as well. I think we're about ready to go to...
Ad hominem arguments get you absolutely nowhere. They're just designed to stop the argument. That's why you see Democrats use that type of strategy all the time. They'll just call someone a bigot or a misogynist, or, you pick the term, and it's supposed to just end the debate because the shocking thing was said, the accusation was made, and it sends everyone, racing for the hills because of fear that whatever comes out of their mouth next is going to, in some way, shape, or form, validate it. It's not. If you always tell the truth, if you're just true to who you are, then ad hominem arguments are just not going to work. People will see through them.
Well, thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor. We want to make sure that we get to our audience questions. We had a great one from Gabriel Katz, and he's asking, he says, recently there's been much outrage over corporate America going woke and becoming outright hostile to Republicans. So as a great example of this is the MLB's choice to move the All-Star Game in response to SB 202 in Georgia. How should Republicans respond to corporate America's recent behavior?
Well, you got to remember that corporations have their own choices to make too. But that also means that you have your choice where you want to go to work. And you can't stay at a company that's going to daily violate your values. What was unfortunate about that decision is that Colorado's laws are not all that different from Georgia's. And I think once again, they were just trying to use ad hominem arguments. You argue at the person, at the man, in order to stop a conversation from happening. What Georgia wanted to do was make it really easy to vote and hard to cheat. And instead, Democrats said, no, this is about stopping people from voting. And in some way, shape, or form, this is racist. Using terms like that on policy that has absolutely nothing to do with what people look like is foolish. And what's unfortunate is we have mainstream media and big tech who will largely play into this, which means it's incumbent upon us to use our circles of influence to refute arguments like that. And listen, you may ruffle a few feathers, but what I told you earlier about always sourcing your arguments is very important. Fight with fact, because people do listen to facts. The YAF actually put out a study recently that said, particularly among Gen Z voters, when offered the facts, people listen. That's really important. Tell stories, use facts. Make sure you have sources for what you say.
So I have a brief follow-up on this before we go to our next audience question. And so that is, we get into this space within the Republican Party where we definitely do want to combat some of the unnecessary steps that are taken in the mainstream media, especially by corporations. But sometimes that pigeonholes us from being able to recognize and take ownership for some of the things that do happen. So with voting laws specifically, I think things got really interesting in Georgia because so many people were talking about different things. It was, is the MLB talking about the ID requirements? Which ones? What are you talking? The water law? Like what part of it are you talking about? And so I think that's something that we've seen come back at us was asking, at what point can we say, you know what, maybe this policy was slightly too restrictive, and then how can we do that while still being able to not make a concession against the woke media or even woke corporations, but still have accountability within our own party that we've kind of been shying away from recently.
I think you've got to get involved in your party and you've got to make those arguments to the powers that be. Within every Republican Party in every state, even the country, all the way up through the RNC, there is a structure of leadership. So every year there are these caucuses and people will elect the leaders of their local county parties. And I wonder, for those folks who are on the Zoom, when was the last time you went to county caucus? When was the last time you ran for a leadership position? When was the last time you went to a Young Republicans meeting or a Republican women meeting and know who the president and the treasurer and the first secretary and the second secretary and the third secretary of all of those organizations are? Because I bet you'll probably say those really aren't fun. And when I have a small amount of free time, I don't choose to do that. And that's understandable. You guys have something extraordinary going on in Gen Z GOP. But I'm telling you right now that your voices should be heard, are essential for growth in our party. Otherwise, I'm starting to be concerned that a lot of the events that I'm attending are attended by Xers and boomers and the occasional millennial, but not a lot of Gen Z GOP within the GOP. And your voices need to be there. If you find them boring, go and make them fun. Make suggestions, bring friends. If you spend the entire time, building a mental laundry list of things that you'd like to do next time, make a couple phone calls, exchange a couple business cards, and then assert your influence as a new member, a new voice in this party, and say, hey, listen, I'm willing to take on the next event or an event in a couple of months. I will plan it. I'm going to bring a bunch of new people who I think might be willing to test drive your organization. Would you like new members? And they will all say yes. You can say, listen, I think with a couple tweaks and doing something like this, we could get some new members and we'll get some thought diversity. We'll get some demographic diversity in here. And we're going to be a much more vibrant party because we need it. You are the future, period, end of story.
You're entirely right here. And that is a perfect segue into our next audience question, which comes from Tyler Van Patten. And he asks, how can we as young people engage our older members of the Republican Party on policy questions that we have different opinions on than the GOP traditionally does? For example, climate change. But, another one of those too is understanding that as we continue and as we've moved on, there are many different things, surrounding legal marriage and all of these other questions that aren't traditional GOP talking points. And as you were saying before, we can go to meetings and we can engage. And I think something as members of Gen Z GOP that we've even experienced and we've been trying to talk to leaders is they'll say, well, you're young. You might be qualified in terms of having a college degree, but why should I listen to you? Something that I always like to say is that we're the GOP, which is the grand old party, and sometimes that old part can really, really hurt us. And so how can we gain that credibility back into the party and say, hey, sure, yeah, I might be young, but my ideas are worth listening to? How can we kind of do that more, especially on some of these issues like climate change and gay marriage?
If you are old enough to vote, you are 100% qualified to contribute to the policy conversation in the GOP. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. And if you are struggling building relationships inside those organizations that I just talked about, go directly to your state representative or your state senator, because you know what? They're counting on you to vote for them, which means as your servant, your public servant, they owe you their ear. They have to listen to you because they want your vote, but they also want to be representing you well. And you can, by going to these county party meetings and going to these organizational meetings, wind up, making friends, influencing people, and getting onto the platform building community, and a committee of people who actually will build the party's platform in your state and eventually build the country's GOP platform at the RNC. There's also a rules committee that you can get on. But unless you're inside these organizations, you probably never knew that at every state convention, there are these platform committees meeting that determine the things we stand for as a party. And if you disagree with the things that they say you stand for, then go tell them. Because I see so many changes, like I said, in this generation from generations past, but folks who still identify as Republicans, who like individual freedoms and liberties, who believe that our Constitution still works, but also may articulate things in a different way and take a different tone in articulating them. People need to know these things. They also want to reach Gen Z voters. So go to these things, and if you're not getting the reception that you absolutely want, call up your state rep, call up your state senator, and say, hey, can we grab coffee? I have some advice for you.
Incredible. So I guess my next point comes down to some data that has been recently released. And we are seeing that in recent generations, including millennials, that traditionally, we have this aspect of as you grow older, you become more conservative, whether that be because, your money is yours and you understand how little that dollar goes, and you want more responsible spending. But we're actually seeing in our polling that this isn't happening amongst younger generations, that they aren't getting more conservative with age. And so I think that really calls out to the fact that we as conservatives are becoming part of a shrinking demographic. And so what do you think are the main changes that we need to make to be able to expand that demographic, even outside of kind of our policy priorities and how we're talking to people, but overall in how we're conducting ourselves and how we're going out there, and how can we make the case of conservatism to young people that equate conservatism with bigotry or equate conservatism towards hatred, especially when we get into movements like what we saw over this last summer with Black Lives Matter, whether you support that movement or not, but we can all agree at the end of the day that humanity is important. So how can we kind of marry these two in the sense of, yes, being conservative means relying on tradition, but also being able to adapt as we move forward?
It's interesting. I was asked a question at a press conference this summer that really speaks to what you're talking about. The other side of the political aisle likes to make all choices binary when it's a tough topic, right? Just as I said, they like to ad hominem argue and say the one word that's going to shut everything down, and then you can't talk about it in a fruitful way anymore because they just said bigot. They just said racist. So we can't talk anymore and have discussions about how we reach an end that everyone is happy with. The same can be said about questions that the other side wants to make this or that binary. And at this press conference, I was basically asked, I'm going to shorten the way they asked it. They said, well, are you for Black lives and against cops? Or are you for cops and against Black lives? That's not a question. That's not a choice. I've also been asked, and I'm not kidding with you, I've also been asked, well, are you for people living and staying well and not getting COVID? Or are you for the economy and schools reopening? Pick one. That's also not a question, not a choice. You can do both at the same time. We need to stop allowing them to thrust these false choices, not only upon us, but upon what you would consider a low information voter, someone who may actually go to social media to socialize, someone who may actually just go to social media to check out what other people are doing, see what other people are having for dinner. You're right. Or see what other people have done over the weekend, or see their cute dogs, whatever. But in the meantime, your friends are posting a whole heck of a lot on their stories and on their actual posts on their pages that speak to their political beliefs. And in many cases, they are dolled up with beautiful filters and they're completely unsourced and frankly false. But they assert that we must choose between one thing or another. We were talking earlier about the environment and how, I think there are a lot of old school Republicans who believe that, well, everybody believes that we want clean air and clean water first, and then, progress as well, but it's not a binary choice. So everybody would believe that. I don't think that that's the case. I think we need to make the regular case and remind people that we care deeply about the environment, that conservatives conserve. If hunters and anglers and farmers are not our first true conservationists, I don't know who is. They have no livelihood. They have no sport unless they work hard on conservation. And so I think it's time to reframe the argument. I think it's time for us to use our influence on social media and within our circles to tell good stories, make sure that we're using facts, source them well, and do not allow the other side to force upon us binary choices where there aren't any.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight and asking all of our questions. And so there is one last audience question that I want to ask. And I know it got asked to you at YAF, so I'm assuming you're probably going to have a similar answer. But is that, are you considering a run for governor in 2022 or continuing your leadership within the Wisconsin State Party?
I will say this. I am working very hard to put together the policy agenda for the future. And right now, I have devoted a lot of time to our little political action committee called Rebecca PAC. We think of very uncreative names for things sometimes. Making sure that we get good conservatives elected to the legislature, to school boards, judgeships. But I think the time is coming in very short order that I'm going to have to focus all of my time and effort on making sure that we have new leadership in the executive branch.
Well, I'm sure I personally am definitely going to be looking forward to that. We really thank you for joining us tonight. And I just want to thank our audience for tuning in. We are super excited to be able to use some of these clips moving forward. And thank you for, hanging out with us for an entire hour. I hope that we were able to fill the void a little bit when it came to missing your kids who are over at dance class right now.
Yeah.
But thank you very, very much for hanging out with us. And we'll be sure to keep up with you on social media. So if you don't follow Gen Z GOP on social media, we are at Gen Z GOP.org on Instagram and Twitter. And if you don't follow Rebecca, she's over here at Rebecca For Real on Twitter, right?
Thank you. Yes. Well, I think that we might have changed it to Rebecca Kleefisch. It's either Rebecca For Real or Rebecca Kleefisch. Let me look it up really quick. But I will say this. I'm Rebecca Kleefisch on Instagram, and I am Rebecca Kleefisch. Well, you can also follow the 1848 projects. Don't forget about that. Oh, I am still Rebecca For Real. But you can look it up as Rebecca Kleefisch. Pick your poison. Either way, you're going to find me. But I'm that on Insta, I'm that on Twitter, and that on Facebook, and 1848 projects across the board on the policy side of things.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And with that, I'm going to sign off and end our broadcast. See you guys next time.